What's up everyone? I just watched a really nice video by Sendaidokai. He makes a lot of videos about the Bitwig native devices, and in this video he showed a use case that I found quite unique, so I wanted to try it myself. The video is linked in the description, by the way, if you want to check it out, but here's a quick TLDW. So you got a sampler, and this sampler is doing some crazy stuff with granular synthesis with the textures mode, and then there is an envelope follower that picks up the signal right away after the sampler, but in another synthesizer, so that the output from the sampler doesn't make itself to the speakers, but instead the polysynth makes itself to the speakers, and then you can use the sampler's output just for the modulation on the polysynth. I found that quite cool, so I did that myself, and in this track it sounds like this. But as you can see, I made some of the things a little bit differently. For example, I didn't use an envelope follower, but the audio rate modulator to modulate the parameters, which is basically the same as the envelope follower, but without the envelope follower itself. So basically you're just modulating the signal directly with the audio wave. And normally when you try to do that with a normal audio input, then you get a very noisy sound, because most audio inputs are just extremely fast and not meant for modulation purposes. But as you can hear, this signal is not fast, but pretty conservative in some way, and we can check it out in the oscilloscope as well to confirm that. So as you can see, it is a reoccurring pattern. It always starts from scratch. This is already one of the things that weren't a case in Sendaidokai's video, because he added randomization to the sampler. But I wanted to find out, can I make something like that that is more consistent with each note the same and still kind of cool? Still kind of have a unique texture, similar to if you were using multi-segment envelope generators. As you can see, I'm not on the new version of Bitwig yet, so I don't have those, but I was just wondering, can I make something that also acts like a more unique version of an ADSR envelope? And yeah, how I did that is in the following way. As you can see, I also used a sampler. I didn't use the textures mode, but just repitch. I didn't repitch anything though. The only thing that I did here is put the speed to 3%, which made it extremely slow. As you can see, I zoomed in very hard on this percussive sample, not for no reason, but so that you can see how slow this really is. This sample doesn't even reach the first zero crossing. That's how slow it is. And you can experiment with different speeds. For example, 0.01% is extremely slow. It's so slow that you cannot even see that it's actually something that changes over time. And you can also go higher with the values, like 12%. Now we see something interesting here. We can actually go below the 0 point. In the audio rate modulator itself, you can rectify the signal, and then it's a little bit different. This is really useful if you only want to have unipolar modulation in the audio rate modulator. Let's go even higher. Let's try 25%. So this is already a very textural modulation curve, and if we now wanted to make that a little bit smoother, we could dial in the low pass filter. Now low pass filters are generally really cool for these kind of things. You can also dial in resonance, but then it's getting a little bit silly, because it creates all of these peak values here that really don't sound that nice as a modulation signal. By the way, the other effect that I'm having lying around here is just a little saturator to make sure that it doesn't exceed 100%, because the audio rate modulator would still interpret that signal that exceeds the 100% value, and I just like it to be limited to that point and maybe round it off a little bit while we are at it. Now let's get a little bit creative. We can load Riff Filter Light and set it to MIDI mode so that it also reacts to the incoming MIDI signal. And now we turn down the cutoff as hard as we can. try different octaves. Okay, so at this point it becomes a little bit inaudible again. So as you can see, using key-tracked filters like that can also be really interesting to alter the modulation signal. It doesn't have to be as simple as the filter in the sampler itself, even though of course you can dial in key tracking on this thing as well, but I just find it more intuitive in Rift filter line. I could play around with different values here. However, you have to make sure to uncheck this thing because this is the snap to zero crossings feature. And if this is enabled, then your modulation signals will always start at 0. However, it can be much nicer to have full control over that. Did you hear the difference between all of these different start points? It is just night and day, and you can just select one of these points that sounds good to you, and then that's the modulation signal. I kind of like this workflow because it is, you know, it's not like the ADSR workflow where you can just craft the wave in exactly the way you want, but it's more like you are playing with randomness by throwing in a sample that was not meant for these kind of purposes and then zooming in so hard that you are just on the lowest level of the waveform. You can really experiment with the underlying texture of the sample and find the perfect spot that just has this unique character that you are searching for. In the end, it is an envelope generator that sounds very different to the typical ADSR as well. It's also a different workflow as with multi-segment envelope generators, because there you also have the problem that you have to exactly know what you want and enter the points that you want to enter. It's not like you are just scrolling through different things that are already there to find inspiration. One thing to keep in mind though, you have to be careful that you still use the AHDSR envelope generator here, because the release time's lowest value is 10 milliseconds, so that when you are also entering 10 milliseconds on the attack time, you got more or less perfectly smooth transitions from one node to another, which makes a lot of a difference when there is a node off signal that is directly followed by a node on signal. Okay, so again, Sendaidokai, your video is great. I just got a lot of inspiration from it. Immediately got a new idea how I wanna tackle the same idea. And yeah, keep it coming.